Claro que sim.
Bom, muito obrigado, professor Manuel Garte. E vamos dar sequência ao primeiro painel. Estamos um pouquinho atrasados, mas nós conseguimos retomar o passo. Com sorte. Apenas lembrando que esse primeiro painel vai ser conduzido em inglês, né? O segundo painel vai ser conduzido em português e os GTs, os grupos de trabalho também. So I'm going to switch to English now, okay? To democratize a little bit more. But before introducing our panelists of this first panel, just a few words about the proposal here, this first panel. I believe it is worth mentioning that the rate of legal inheritance syndrome very focused challenges certain intelligence activities in democratic oversight in the region. It is important to critically our specific technological, social, political reality. And in my opinion, has been recognized as one of the centers of policymaking and that have deeply impacted both the institutional for oversight, intelligence oversight, and intelligence capabilities as well, counting with a very proactive investigative civil society organizations deeply engaged in the discussion, really shaping the legal status of intelligence oversights. And also, finally, a broader scholarship on international intelligence cooperation, data protection, and surveillance policy. And that's why we decided to bring some of the best names in the country, in Germany, in order to dialogue with our intelligence landscape in Brazil. And I hope this comparison will prove to be very fruitful. And to help us understand this scenario, we have Professor Marion Albers, who holds the chair of Public Information Law at the University of Hamburg, and it is currently a Ferdinand Braudel Senior Fellow at the European University of Florence. He's an expert member of the German Council for Scientific Information Architecture, Infrastructure, sorry, and was principal investigator in the German, Brazilian DAD-CAPES project, internet regulation, and internet rights in so many other positions. Professor Albers has published considerably on information, self-determination, data protection, and European law. Ana Cruz. Ana Cruz is director of the Intelligence School, which is a unity part of the Brazilian Intelligence Agency, and she is an intelligence officer since 2008. She holds a master's degree in human rights at the Federal University of Pará, sorry, and is a member of the Rede de Pesquisa em Inteligência Estratégica, translating really the strategic intelligence. Thorsten Wetzling holds a PhD in political science and is currently directs the digital rights surveillance and democracy unit at the think tank Interface. He is founder of the European Intelligence Oversight Network and co-founder of He researches especially accountability mechanisms and has served as an expert for the European Parliament at the Bundestag and has collaborated with the OECD, Council of Europe, and the UNPD, the United Nations Development Program. And finally, Professor Alcides Peron is a professor of Faculty of Applied Science at the University of Campinas. He holds a PhD in Science and Technology Policy from the same university. Professor Alcides was also a visiting researcher at the Lancaster University, uh, at the Department of War Studies at King's College London, and his research projects include especially topics on surveillance, AI, and new technologies, security, counterintelligence, cyber warfare. To invite panelists here just to give the first start. Welcome. Professor Albers, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Equipe técnica pergunta se professor Albers.
Okay, I hear you.
You can hear us? And you can,
yes.
We can hear you, but we cannot see you.
My video is on.
Okay, we cannot see you.
Okay. I don't see the reason why you can't see me. Once again, I try. Now? Do you see me?
I can hear you, but we cannot still see you. So, Professor, while we are working on your video and your microphone, we're going to pass the word to Ana Cruz to give it a start to our panel, and you can be our second speaker. Okay? Guilherme, por favor, você pode botar a apresentação da Ana Cruz? Ela vai começar. Não dá? Tudo bem, se for o caso, pode ser, tudo bem. Tá, tudo bem, tudo bem. So Thorsten, can you start the panel? And then we can pass the word to Professor Albers, and then Professor Alcides. Is that okay? Okay, so the floor is yours.
Okay, I'll start. Yeah. Are you here twice? Okay, well, we are opening this panel, and I can hear my voice, but I hope it's now okay. I would like to, in the 15 minutes that I have, to first of all, that's me, that's my conscience, that's my. That's okay.
Essa é a apresentação da professora Marion Albers. A professora Marion Albers está conectada conosco? Ok, então, sem apresentações agora, vamos passar para o Thorsten, que não vai precisar de apresentação, tá? E depois a gente projeta, seja a da Ana ou seja da professora Albers. Tá bom?
Okay. So, well, I would really like to thank the organizers, everybody here, universities for the kind invitation. It's the inaugural conference of many more iterations of this forum. I think I would like to touch on three themes. One is I've been asked to share some general observations on the regulation of new technologies and its nexus with the regulation to democratic control of intelligence services. A second point I would really like to emphasize, because I'm here, there's a white paper circulating, and there are from your excellent presentation here, like Brazil and Argentina are two very good contenders for new establishments of reform institutions. I'd really like to emphasize the importance of these have comprehensive the IT system and the database of the intelligence services, because in the 21st century, to really have effective and independent oversight, no self-respecting oversight body should do without to information. Otherwise, it's good, but it's really not sufficient. I would focus on current work of it's on the purchases of data by intelligence services, advertisement-based intelligence. It's also a subject, I think, that requires more attention. I will start with point on access, because that's really a game changer for intelligence oversight. And Bernardo was very interested in that topic, and he reminded me of a publication he did, which was a bit early perhaps in its time. It's 2019. It's called Data-Driven Intelligence Oversight, Recommendations for a Systems Update. And we realized something that later on in 2020, the German Constitutional Court also wrote in its judgment that oversight bodies should write on control programs on the data which they have been given access. Because if you have access to the IT systems and the database of the intelligence services, that is a great thing. It's only a start. A lot of people say, "Oh, we now have access," but what do you do with the access? So there's a whole agenda I just want to shed briefly light on. And I think it's now in a number of European countries established that oversight bodies are given access to the ICT systems and the databases of intelligence services. We're talking about large databases, all kinds of collection methods, but I can point you to Denmark, I can point you to the Netherlands, I can point you to Norway, the United Kingdom, Sweden, Switzerland, Germany, and France. And it's been quite an interesting development. Some agencies were giving access on a mode base, so could take on data and then take this bit of data that they were allowed to take and review it. But some have been granted more and more really comprehensive live access to the database. And as you can imagine, this is something that requires trust, and it's something that also has IT, cybersecurity questions that arise. Not only is the intelligence service regarding its data, now you have to think about the risk that an oversight can be hacked. And of course, these are important things, but when we think about the importance of effectiveness and the legality of intelligence services action, and also the proportionality of data use, because these techniques are very invasive. So I find that having over was due to the Snowden revelations back in 2013 that these oversight bodies are being granted more access is a positive thing. Once you have this you can then do interesting data oversight. That's I hear a lot, and I understand, respect, of course, the political role, and there should be parliamentary oversight. That is undisputed. But next to parliamentary oversight, ideally, you would have professional oversight practitioners who are doing the 24/7 task, doing the use of data, the processing of data, and the sharing of data. And a politician sits in a parliamentary committee, all due respect, doesn't have the capacity to do it. And so, if you have access, you can, for instance, look at the log files. So how different data systems have been used. Then again, you can have an agenda to it and say, are the services required to just an agent X open the data and close it, or do you have more information on that day of agent X opened the files, shared it with another agency, and this then led to a new database that's been opened. So log file analysis gets prompts to the oversight body when a data has been shared perhaps with a problematic internet. Also, the sharing between private actors and the public sector could also be a lot more investigated once you have access to the log file. Data deletion, huge topic. When you no longer have the right to data because legal says it forever, have you really deleted it, or has it been lingering in your systems? And if so, how can you? Is there of interest of the services themselves? And so oftentimes when we have these dialogues, we realize that there's a great by the itself ineffective oversight. It also shields us from executive. So and it's the tasking of intelligence by the government, but it's the implementation of those tasks by the services. And the services have an interest in legal clarity. And so I'm no way against, obviously, arguing for the need for intelligence. There's intelligence. But it heightens the see of this to really have genuine at control. And to this also, Mr. Roger, that it's a constant work in progress. Like in other political fields, it's not perfect. With genuine efforts, and you learn from past mistakes, and you share with others. And often, also, intelligence governance is unique, but it's not as unique as some people may say. Learn from banking oversight or other public sectors. So there's a lot to learn. And if you're interested, I'll leave this copy to you, Ado, because I think it's nice that you mentioned it. But let me touch on the second point. I'm running out of time. But governments can compel data from the private sector. That's a long tradition. But there's something else going on, and that's beyond the compelled access to data. So public-private co of intelligence, where the intelligence community can purchase data from vendors of all kinds, brokers, or they can buy tools for automatic data analysis, or they can subscribe live feeds and have like a subscription to geolocation data that has been in sale. And there are very interesting questions that come up with it. It's the question: to what extent has the service has access to this data, or whether that access is allowed the obligation with the private sector to let the analysis done by it. And maybe the data is also no longer stored on the service of the intelligence services, but at the private sector. And again, have a lot of oversight. They have direct access to the IT systems of the service. They may not have access to the data when it's served when it's private entities. So there are a lot of risks attached to this paradigm shift that's relying on data. There are many risks for national security. You can identify national security and military entities, location data, can identify vulnerabilities in infrastructure. Of course, there are also a lot of risks to the rights protection, the right to privacy, the right to informational self-determination. All of these rights, when the intelligence community collects data, and of course, it can do different things. It can do signal intelligence. It can do computer invasive technologies, so the net detection, but it also can do traditional human intelligence, also set up, store, advertisement intelligence. So if all of it combined and triangulated, German had an interesting concept. It spoke of additional imprint, something that looks very suspicious on first sight. Your geolocation data from today, where you've been, but if you mix and triangulate that with all other data that's available to service, that can really provide a very, very granular profile of you, and that's you need to have a justification for. And so, last quote, I want to expand on things that I found as a workshop, because you mentioned I direct European Intelligence Oversight Network, where we direct oversight bodies from a number of European countries. It's Chatham House rules, so I cannot really say all that much for countries. Nations, I mentioned, it's work in progress. But Europe may think that there are some advanced regulation in place and there are advanced oversight bodies with access, surely not across the entire country. So I'm also working with some European countries who are more advanced. But again, they also face a number of challenges. That's a challenge to say, now we're not perfect, but I'm not perfect either. So as long as we really address those, it's a good thing. We found in a workshop where we sent out a questionnaire on this topic of data purchasing. We found, for instance, I'm just 7 observations that half of the bodies that we interviewed and invited to the workshop, they report their mandate does not cover the procurement phase. So it's not possible to review, let alone record changes to the signing of contracts, for instance, with a data analytical company. And so that's procurement pre-phase. And government intelligence decisions to acquire commercially sourced data are also not subject to prior authorization. A number of government access to data, you need to have European countries prior in the authorization. You have authorization, you say how long you want to intend to use it for what purpose, and you need to also check ex post. But when it comes to the data purchases, it is often not an independent oversight institution. So interestingly, half of the oversight interviewed, they don't even have material authorization. So government authorization kind of action of brokered data by vendor from the commercial sector. The majority of oversight bodies represented in the sample that we have, institutions have though conducted investigations and audits. So the attention is brought to doing for legal to also think, what's the have a proper legal basis for government purchases of data, intelligent data purchasing, and interestingly find different opinions. And there are reforms in Europe at the moment. Fourth, while no oversight body in our sample has binding power to stop the conclusion of a contract, it's another big fighting bone of contention in Europe. Bodies are binding powers. It's one thing, the right to be consulted and hear their opinion, but it's quite another. Give them the power to look. You cannot do as you wish. Delete data. This happening in some has this, but others don't. And this doesn't necessarily then apply to the purchasing data. And so at the moment, they don't have the power to end the conclusion of a contract with the private sector entity. And there's no valid basis for its retention. The majority of oversight bodies, as a point in our sample, stated that they cannot report publicly about the scope of the intelligence community's access to commercially sourced. Again, we are living in a democracy. There is shrinking space for democracy. I'm aware of this, but we also want to lead by example, and we don't want to copy the authoritarian playbook that is being in Russia and China and elsewhere. At least that's my opinion. And therefore, you need to have trust. If there is a whole set of data that the government has access to, the government can use for a lot of basic techniques, you would expect that an oversight body can do some report on the access to this. So that, again, where I find there will be discussions going forward, and you mentioned it, we have an engaged civil society, and there are pending reforms in Germany at the moment, and this topic will come up again, and it's also a topic, by the way, it's now I think second program in the U.S. Congress. The majority of institutions that have encountered severe difficulties when asking the service about the tools to use. Which tool do you use data and tools for making a use of the data that you purchase? So the oversight bodies grasp of the technology that come to effect is also sometimes limited. Lastly, and these are just bold findings, the majority of oversight bodies reported to us that they do not have a sufficient overview when commercially sourced data is being transferred, whether national or international. So, of course, there's one thing to have a police and law enforcement community, and another to have an intelligence community. And it mentioned also the legacy of the Cold War. One core legacy from us is police can see a lot of things, cannot do that much, and those bodies cannot see that much. That's the occasion. But if data transfers are not being sufficiently reported, either the have no overview of what is being transferred with whom, also internationally, that raises. I only have a few seconds left, so I'll leave it at that. I also meant to say something on the European AI Act and how it links to intelligence legislation, but I'll keep that for the discussion. All I want to say in this regard, though, is there are fundamental exemptions. So the AI Act doesn't apply to the national security sector or look at national regulation. But this stay within the time.
Very much, Thorsten. Let's try again to put Professor Albers in the screen, okay? The idea initially would be for to Professor Albers to give general context, institutional architecture bodies, and then to present us the new challenges nowadays. But either way, I think it is good for her now to give the broad context, the institutional context, and then these two speeches will make more sense. Como estamos, Guilherme? Professor Albers, are you here with us?
I can hear you, yes. I can't.
Unfortunately, we have to wait a little bit for the technical staff to make everything.
Can you hear me?
Professor Albers?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay.
Okay. Can you see me now? The video is deactivated. Okay.
Yes.
Oh, okay. So at least you can hear me, I think.
Professor, just a minute. Can you please lower down a little bit the volume of your computer because we are listening to some loop.
Okay.
Yes.
Better now? Is it better? Low down?
Better now. I guess so.
Better?
Yes. It is better.
Oh.
Yes.
Okay.
You can feel free and comfortable to share your screen as well. Okay.
Okay, you can see the presentation, but you can't see me as far as I see. I can't start the video. So you can't see me, unfortunately, but you can see the slides.
Yes, Professor.
I don't hear anything anymore, unfortunately.
Oh, Professor.
Okay, I think you have to talk into the microphone, otherwise I wouldn't hear anything.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, if you see the slides, I think it's fine. Okay, I think I start. Do you see the presentation now? You have it, huh? I sent it before.
Yes, Professor. We can see you, we can see the presentation, and we can hear you well.
Okay, then I just start with the presentation. Yes, my presentation should be an overview on the intelligence in Germany, how it is regulated and oversighted. Next slide, please. Yes, so intelligence services in Germany are divided. We have the Federal Intelligence Services. You can see the very big building there, which is a new one in Berlin right now. Then we have the Office for the Protection of the Constitution in charge of domestic intelligence, while the Federal Intelligence Service is only in charge for foreign intelligence. We have a specific military counterintelligence service. And then we have the state offices for, no, leave it like that. I will, slide before, please. I will tell you when you have to change the slide. The slide before, I need the slide before, yes, thank you. And then we have the state offices for the protection of the constitutions. So it's a quite fragmented system of intelligence services. And there are often a lot of discussions because of the deficiencies. But this division is already a consequence of the principle of separation of powers, in particular the rule of law and the federal system. Factual developments lead to specific difficulties with that. For example, the distinction between foreign and domestic matters is being eroded by developments, for example, hybrid warfare, cyber attacks on infrastructure, interferences in elections, and so on. You will know about these discussions. So the division between an intelligence service in charge of foreign intelligence and one in charge of domestic intelligence has its weaknesses. And we have also a lot of discussions with regard to the division of responsibility for the protection of the constitution between the federal government, the Bundesamt für Verfassungsschutz, and the Länder, because there are different laws across the Länder, varying powers of investigation and difficulties in the exchange of information. So consequence of the rule of law and the federal system, but already a lot of weaknesses with this. Next slide, please. Next slide now. So this is echoed in the legal basis of the intelligence services in Germany. We have the law on the Federal Intelligence Service and the law on cooperation between the federal government and the Länder in matters relating to the protection of the constitution. We have the law on the military counterintelligence services, and then the particular law on the restriction of the privacy of correspondence. This is a reaction to the specific protection of the secrecy of telecommunications in the Constitution. We have a particular law on parliamentary oversight of federal intelligence activities, and then the general law on data protection and the state laws on the protection of the Constitution. All of these laws enshrine extensive powers of intervention, and they are constantly adapted to new technological developments and ongoing debates about reform, most recently in 2026, this year, and I will briefly outline that later. The law on the Federal Intelligence Service contains an entire section on the Independent Supervisory Board, which was established following a decision of the Federal Constitutional Court, and I will introduce that later on too. Yes, this law on the restriction of the secrets of privacy of correspondence and telecommunication reacts to Article 10, and the law on data protection is a supplementary law applying only in a subsidiary matter. Next slide, please. I will now briefly introduce a case law of the Federal Constitutional Court, which might be interesting for you, starting with a judgment in the year of 1999. It is a second judgment on the Federal Intelligence Service, and an important judgment because the court has decided that Article 10, this is a secrecy of telecommunication, protects against all information and data processing measures. So not only the step when the state obtains knowledge of telecommunication, but also all following steps up to the subsequent use of the data obtained. And then the court has set out particular requirements for such a surveillance, precautions against the risks arising from the collection and use of personal data, in particular the principle of purpose limitation and particular thresholds for data sharing with other authorities. Next slide, please. The next important decision has been made in the year of 2008, and the court has derived here the fundamental right to protection of the confidentiality and integrity of information technology systems. I know that there is a broad discussion in Brazil right now about such a right, and this judgment reacted to to a law regarding a state office for the protection of the Constitution, where this office got the authority to place a Trojan horse on personal computers. This was a case, and reacting to that, the Federal Constitutional Court has derived this fundamental right to protection of the confidentiality and integrity of information technology system, and has required has pointed out that such a measure requires high thresholds, a specific danger, and also a judicial order. This judgment has been commented extensively, also whether such a right is really necessary, but the court sticks to it and has made some recent judgments in the year of 2025, one regarding police law, one regarding criminal prosecution. So I think, meanwhile, this is a quite established novel facet of the general right of personality. Next slide, please. So now we have a recent judgment of 2020. It's a very important judgment with many ramifications, because the court has decided that German state authority is bound by fundamental rights, not only domestically, but the binding effect of fundamental rights extends beyond the German territory and also protects foreigners in other countries against telecommunication surveillance. So even if the Federal Intelligence Service surveys telecommunication from China to Russia, for example, people are protected by German fundamental rights, because it is a German constitution. It is very important to see that the Federal Constitutional Court has then differentiated between the dimensions of protection. So protection in form of a right to defense is extended, but of course the protection with regard, for example, getting access to data the Federal Intelligence Services collected about a person is not covered if we have to do with foreigners on both sides. So foreigners doesn't have a right to access data Federal Intelligence Services has collected about him or her. Important is also that the Federal Constitutional Court has decided that the strategic surveillance is an exceptional power. It is a very extensive authorization of collecting data, and therefore Federal Intelligence Services must not have operational powers. So this is also a consequence of the rule of law. And the court decided that the legislator must provide for comprehensive legal rules compliant with the rule of law and fundamental rights. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yes, and one main part of this judgment was the establishment of independent oversight bodies. The court argued that because the Federal Intelligence Service conducts surveillance measures in secrecy, and also access is restricted, and it's a very extensive competence and so on, and therefore this must be compensated by the establishment of independent oversight bodies. I think you went too far. I need page 7, not page 8. Page 7 of the slide. Go back one slide, please. Back. This is page 9 now. I need page 7. Yes. So this is the independent oversight, which is a section in this judgment of 2020. And the court has made extensive statements regarding independent oversight, and it required, on the one hand, an independent oversight resembling judicial review by a body that has the power to make final decisions, and this independent oversight must monitor key procedural steps of strategic surveillance. And on the other hand, the surveillance of the Federal Intelligence Services must be subject to administrative oversight by a body that conducts randomized oversight of the legality of the entire surveillance process on its own initiative. So the court has required 2 facets of an independent oversight that must compensate the secrecy and the extent of surveillance measures the Federal Intelligence Services conduct. Now, page 8, please. And the court has also required and made extensive comments on the organization of these oversight bodies. They must have a separate budget, independent personnel, procedural autonomies, and all powers necessary for conducting effective oversight. And it must also be ensured that the oversight conducted by these bodies is not obstructed by the third-party rule. The third-party rule are agreements with foreign partners on sharing collected data. So the German government is not allowed to say, for example, these agreements are secret and the oversight bodies do not have access to them. They must have access. So the court tried to establish a quite extensive independent oversight on the Federal Intelligence Service. Next slide, please. One of the last decisions of the Federal Constitutional Court is extension of the tasks of the Federal Intelligence Services, and the law has been extended to the purpose of detecting cyber threats. It has been made, I think, in 2022 or something, or 2020. The court accepted this extension of the competencies of the Federal Intelligence Services, but once again made some statements on requirements that have to be met in case the Federal Intelligence Service is competent for this. For example, deletion requirements, and once again, an independent oversight regime that is necessary. Next slide, please. So with all of these decisions, we have a quite extensive system of control and oversight regarding the oversight of intelligence services. First of all, we have the Parliamentary Oversight Panel, which is traditional and which has been established long time ago. It monitors the activities of the intelligence services, must be informed by the government about key operations. We have the G10 Commission, which oversees telecommunication surveillance. We have this Independent Control Council, which has been established following the court decision of 2020, and it oversees technical intelligence of the Federal Intelligence Services, signals, electronics, cyber defense, or satellites, and is has a quite extensive oversight. Then we have the Federal Commissioner for Data Protection, which controls data processing activities. And we have, of course, the federal ministries, which provide administrative supervision. At first glance, as you can see, this looks quite extensive, but of course, every institution has its own specific challenges and limitations. If we have the parliamentary oversight, this body is, of course, dominated by government members who rarely exercise critical oversight. The body also struggles with leaks to the press, therefore is cautious to discuss sensible things, and efforts are often made to keep the opposition on a short leash wherever possible. The G10 Commission is to some extent a largely honorary task, although requiring a great deal of expertise. So also restricted. The Independent Control Council is intended to be more effective than the G10 Commission. The judgment of the Federal Constitutional Court has seen the weaknesses of the G10 Commission and therefore pointed out to the detailed requirement I have just presented. But this council has begun its work in 2022, so it remains to be seen how effectively it functions. The Data Protection Commissioner is often obstructed, particularly on the grounds that other institutions were responsible for oversight, and the Commissioner can only issue admonitions, so has no far-reaching right of intervention if something is considered to be unlawful. Next slide, please. This is the Independent Control Council, just how it is organized, and you see on the left side the part resembling judicial control, and in the middle the administrative control. So you see this body is intended to be quite effective, but remains to be seen whether it is successful. Next slide, please. The system of oversight is quite fragmented, as we have seen. Sometimes bodies have also a lack of information, or the Federal Intelligence Service tries to withhold information. And we have, regarding the Federal Commissioner for Data Protection, a recent decision of the Federal Administrative Court of March 2026. And this decision says that this commissioner has no legal entitlement to enforce competencies of inspection. Here, the commissioner wanted to inspect a decision of the president of the Federal Intelligence Service to conduct computer network exploitation measures. And the president refused to give the commissioner access to the documents. The commissioner claimed before the court, and the court said it is not admissible, such a claim. The commissioner is restricted to make a complaint to the government that he hasn't got access, but that's it. So this, of course, restricts the Federal Commissioner for Data Protection in his oversight tasks. We have, as always, a shortage of staff and resources, and some bodies might have a lack of expertise. As I said, the G10 Commission is an honorary task. Next slide, please. Right now, we have a lot of discussion on reform, because this fragmented system is subject to criticism. And also Europe, of course, tries to react to the war of aggression of Russia against Ukraine, and to influence on elections and hybrid warfare and everything. So there are several reform proposals for nearly every intelligence service. Discussed are competencies for hacking in foreign countries as well as in Germany. So federal intelligence services should have the possibility to hack into infrastructure arrangement. For the Federal Intelligence Services are also discussed competencies for acts of sabotage abroad. Discussed are competencies for access to emails and chats, also to the content, not only to metadata, but also to the content of emails and chats, of course, and also competencies for using AI in an extensive measure. And discussed are also a reform of oversight mechanisms, because the system is considered to be too fragmented, and the different competencies are not always clear, as we have seen with regard to the Data Protection Commissioner. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. If you can hear us.
Yes, I can hear.
Okay, perfect. So I think with the speech of Thorsten and Professor Albers, we have a good picture of the landscape of current challenges and the landscape of intelligence oversight in Germany. And I think we have now a good parallel to talk about the Brazilian challenges and the Brazilian architecture of intelligence services and oversight as well. And then we can talk a little bit more of this comparison and further reforms and necessities in both countries in the debate moment. And with no further delay, I'm going to pass the floor to Ana Cruz.
Morning. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I'd like to thank you, Conrado and Ramiro, for the invitation and for the very warm welcome I received. I will speak in English so everyone in the plenary session can follow, but my slides are in Portuguese and I will guide you through them. At the end of the presentation, I kindly ask you for your understanding if I answer questions in Portuguese. I hope this will be a valuable discussion for all of us, and I apologize to those who prefer Portuguese and to those that will notice some mispronunciations. So, when addressing the issue of oversight of intelligence activity within this specific space and time, Brazil, 21st century, I think of a cascade of causes and consequences, which I will organize under three main points. Post-democracy, the asymmetry between controllers and those being controlled, and a solution to be found not through any new technology item, but through a very ancient one. I will begin with the crisis and political and institutional effectiveness of our era, marked by a dissociation between a regulatory body and its actual force, a hallmark of the so-called post-democracy. It is true that regarding intelligence, a significant legislative deficit remains. The activity has not yet been constitutionalized, and many structural issues remain unaddressed by law or by regulation, such as the protection of agents' identities and the regulation of the operational activities. However, there is a very clear provision for oversight by the National Congress, with the prerogative of full access to files, areas, and facilities of the Brazilian intelligence system agencies, regardless level of classification. In addition to oversight by the judiciary, which can be triggered by any citizen due to the Direito rule or princípio da inafastabilidade jurisdicional. And there is even the oversight by the society, which can resort to transparency and reporting tools, such as the Fala BR, Ombudsman platform, and the Access to Information Act, our LAI in Portuguese. So, if we find that the conditions to control these activities do exist, then the crisis in oversight effectiveness, and with it, the crisis in intelligence legitimacy, is caused less by a lack of formal muscle and more by what I call a sedentary behavior. I move then to a second problem. I will continue with this kinesiological metaphor of a body that needs to move, for it has become sedentary. The issue is that at a certain point, and I believe that we are already in this point, we begin to deal with the degeneration caused by sarcopenia. It so happens that an activity as a lifestyle caused for political and public apathy of interest regarding intelligence, this inactivity, this apathy, causes both intelligence and its oversight to age precariously, lacking vigor and with severely impaired functionality. This second problem is essentially a consequence of the first. This atrophy, in our analogy, corresponds to intelligence detached from its purpose, dehydrated of human and budgetary resources. While in major powers, intelligence services anticipate and influence realities shaping the international system, as we have recently seen in Venezuela, Russia, and Israel, we limit ourselves to the adaptation necessary for survival. I must, however, offer a caveat. Agreeing with Francisco Gaetani and Miguel Lago, some oversight and inspection bodies, such as the Public Prosecutor's Office and the Federal Court of Accounts, the Federal Police, they appear to have gained mass and strength much faster and more competently than the Strategic Intelligence Advisory structure. This creates an unequal relationship between controllers and those being controlled, largely invisible to the public eye. In this case, without symmetry of capabilities, it is difficult for oversight to play a driving and propelling role. It often results in greater recrimination and apathy instead. I have prepared some tables comparing salaries and the recruitment process across different public administrations careers. The slides are in Portuguese, but I also provided English versions so anyone can follow. And I will keep silent for a while so we can meditate on them. Pessimistic as I may be in my diagnosis, I remain optimistic when it comes to action and prescription. As a director of the Intelligence School of Brazilian Intelligence Agency, I believe the treatment for this condition lies not in new technologies, but in the ancient technology of teaching and learning. I have previously advocated for what I called the oversight of the state intelligence activity by its sponsor, considering the sponsor not the political decision maker, but the people. Outwardly, this is me being optimistic. So outwardly, I believe that creating intelligence culture through active transparency and network dialogue, non-classified publications, and outreach initiatives will shape public opinion regarding intelligence activity. Inwardly, the structuring of a curricula combining technical skills with high-level ethical discussions will also aid to professionalize civil servants. I hope that these outward and inward efforts converge in favor of a secure movement of intelligence activity, both democratically healthy and globally accurate. The exercise for this body is thus the one prescribed by Pericles, and we are practicing it here. After all, debate is not an obstacle to action. Rather, the real obstacle is failing to be enlightened by the debate before the time for action arrives. So, thank you all.
Thank you, Anna. This was very insightful. And together with this overview of Anna, I would like to pass the floor to Alcides.
Legal. Bom dia, povo. Wagner Moura can compliment everybody in English in a good low. In Portuguese, why cannot compliment you in Portuguese, okay? So, guys, thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you, André. Thank you, Conrado. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here today with you. My name is Alcides. I'm from Unicamp, also from Lavitz, and from the post-graduation program in International Relations, Santiago Dantas in São Paulo. So my proposal here with you is to discuss about the intersections between the rising far right globally and specifically in Brazil, because someone needs to address this, and the uses and instrumentalizations of intelligence within new technologies applied for surveillance and production of dossiers here in Brazil. So I'll read some presentation here and discuss with you, okay? So I would like to begin by situating this discussion within a transformation that unfolded globally, marked by the resurgence of radical far-right movements and governments, whose political projects have consistently relied on the centrality of security as a governing principle. These political formations, they elevate security to a structuring axis of governance, mobilizing narratives of crisis, disorder, and internal threat to legitimize expanded forms of intervention. In this context, digital surveillance is crucial for operationalizing what I call techno-authoritarianism. I wrote some pieces about this topic recently, and I will be glad to share with you as well. So globally, we observe an increasing reliance on systems such as spywares, open source intelligence tools, OSINTs, which are deployed to anticipate and preemptively manage behaviors through the production of dossiers. In this sense, we witness a reconfiguration of governance through data-driven infrastructures that enable new forms of intervention with profound implications for democratic life. Thus, I want to interrogate the political economy of and operational logics of these systems within intelligent activities, highlighting the risks and techno-authoritarian forms they engender, calling for a repoliticization of intelligence infrastructures and their governance. So it's within this context that I mobilize the concept of techno-authoritarianism as a broader mode of governance that articulates digital technologies with authoritarian political rationalities. As I argue in my recent work, techno-authoritarianism is characterized by the growing use of AI-based and data-driven systems to underpin practices of surveillance, control, and intervention, often framed as efficient responses to an uprising society and intense neoliberal crisis globally. What is at stake here is not only the adoption of few technologies, but the consolidation of a political logic in which intervention is justified in advance of action, often related to a permanent state of urgency and to the frequent labeling of crime and political positions groups as existential threats. Moreover, this techno-political configuration resonates with emerging far-right imaginaries that explicitly envision forms of governance based on total visibility, algorithm decision-making, and monitoring of population. What is core here, as we discussed yesterday, with the perspectives of Didier Bigot and Bernard Hacourt, for whom, after 9/11, the exercise of security turned into a counter-revolutionary action in which legal limits are frequently overcome as the logic of external and internal enemies are now intertwined. Examining the global markets for spyware and open source intelligence tools, I noticed that both domains are deeply interconnected, forming a layered architecture of data extraction, aggregation, and innovation. So the global spyware market is relatively small if compared to another markets of technology. This market generates approximately 10 to 12 billion annually, operating through a dense and opaque network of private vendors, intermediaries, and state clients. So it's not a totally legal market. It's a kind of obscure and also legal market intersection. Recent mapping efforts have identified over 500 entities distributed across more than 40 countries, including developers, exploit brokers, and integrators. These companies are heavily concentrated in Israel and United States. Spyware systems such as Pegasus or First Mile are characterized by the ability to gain covert and invasive access to individual devices, enabling operators to extract communications, active microphones and cameras, and monitor behaviors in real time. In contrast, OSINT market is broader and diffuse. Rather than relying on intrusion, these systems collect and process publicly available data, including social media activity, digital footprints, and open databases. This market includes major technology firms and data analytics companies such as Palantir, Babel Street, Record the Future, and Cobwebs Technologies, Maltego in Europe, Israel, United States. Both Spire and OSINT technologies, they are significantly expanding into Latin America, mainly during the expansion of far-right governments right here. Investigations by Citizen Lab, Access Now, Amnesty International have documented the uses of commercial spywares in multiple countries in the region, including Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, El Salvador, often targeting journalists, activists, and political actors. In Brazil, same reports indicate attempts to acquire or deploy similar technologies alongside broader investments in digital intelligence systems. Also, Brazil have incorporated data integration platforms, social media monitoring tools, and analytical systems into their security apparatuses, such as their PIA systems. The expansion of these technologies is often accompanied by a weak regulatory frameworks, creating conditions under which surveillance practices can evolve with minimal accountability. Taken together, the coexistence of spyware and OSINTs reveals that contemporary intelligence practice is structured by an integrated architecture in which different tools operate at multiple levels. Spywares enable deep individualized access to subjects, while OSINTs enable large-scale aggregation and analysis of behavioral data. The combination of these systems allows for the continuous productions of dynamic, auto-updatable dossiers, which can be mobilized for monitoring, prediction, and also coercion of people. In this sense, these new technologies apparatus drive surveillance-based intelligence from observation to accumulation and continuous processing of data, especially through the production of dossiers. The dossier can be understood as a structural outcome of surveillance, a compilation of data that renders individuals and groups legible to institutions of power. These are no longer static files. We are not discussing about just the production of a dead file. We are discussing about a dynamic datafied profiles that integrate multiple sources of information into continuously evolving representations of subjects. In this sense, the dossier becomes a modulative instrument capable of shaping behavior by anticipating and constraining possible actions. Dossiers, they are dispositives that structure how individuals are known, categorized, and acted upon. In doing so, they participate in the production of subjects as governable entities, translating complex social lives into legible and actionable data. This process is embedded in classificatory regimes that define what counts as risk, device, or threat, thereby shaping both institutional responses and individual trajectories. From this perspective, the power exercised through dossiers, they operate through a more diffuse mechanisms, including anticipation, classification, and modulation. As a result, individuals, and this is important for the dossier production, as a result, individuals are increasingly governed and framed not on the basis of what they have done, but what they are inferred to be capable of doing. This dynamic is closely linked to multiple forms of violence, such as structural violence, symbolic violence, and psychological violence, by shaping reputations, generating fear and self-regulation. Within this broader configuration, the expansion of OSINTs and spywares have increasingly widespread across institutional domains, extending beyond traditional intelligence agencies to include police forces, administrative bodies, and even hybrid public-private arrangements. This generalization has significant implications. In particular, it contributes for the blurring of the distinction between intelligence and investigation, which has historically been central to democratic governance. Intelligence activities are typically oriented towards the production of strategic knowledge, often operating under conditions of secrecy and with fewer procedural constraints targeted at foreign threats, whereas investigative activities are expected to adhere to legal and due process and evidentiary requirements. OSINTs and spyware technologies, they destabilize this distinction by enabling actors engaged in intelligent work to generate forms of knowledge that can be mobilized in investigative contexts without necessarily being subject to the same standards of verification, accountability, or transparency. At the same time, actors involved in policy and investigation can incorporate OSINTs by passing traditional safeguards that regulate evidence collection. And this convergence generate a gray zone in which information initially gathered for monitoring purposes can be repurposed for enforcement, while data of uncertain reliability can influence decisions with significant consequences for individuals and groups. The case of intelligence abuses during Bolsonaro administration offers a revealing entry point into the articulation between techno-authoritarian rationalities and those surveillance. Brazil military dictatorship established a dense architecture of intelligence and surveillance centered on systematic production of files on political dissidents, union leaders, and civil society actors. This practice did not disappear with democratization. Rather, they were partially reconfigured and institutionalized within new democratic frameworks, preserving both organizational logics and professional cultures oriented toward the monitoring and classification. What emerges, what is new here, is their transformation through digital infrastructures. And in this sense, the shift from analog files to digital dossiers should be understood as a process of intensification in which the capacity to collect, store, and mobilize information expands significantly while retaining logics of control. This transformation becomes visible in the context of recent political developments under Bolsonaro's administration, which foregrounded a punitivist security logic as a central axis of governance. In this sense, the identification of internal enemies have been increasingly mediated by data-driven systems. The intelligence abuses are marked by growing concerns regarding the deployment of spyware technologies within state infrastructures. One of the most emblematic cases involves the uses of Israeli spyware first mile by intelligence actors to generate reports and track members of the judiciary, including ministers of the Supreme Court. Additional evidence of the dossier surveillance is related to the production of dossier reports targeting the anti-fascist groups, in which state actors compiled and circulated information on individuals framed as potential threat, despite the absence of criminal activity among them. Similarly, reports have documented the creation of dossiers on academics and public intellectuals, such as Paulo Sérgio Pinheiro from Núcleo de Estudos da Violência, Center of Studies of Violence, in which I'm a member, revealing how surveillance infrastructures were mobilized to constrain critical voices. Intelligence dossier surveillance then is embedded in a broader process of reputational politics, in which digital profiles can function as instruments for delegitimizing political opponents. When situated within this broader context, Brazil stands out for the way in which these practices are articulated with political projects that explicitly mobilize security as a central topic. So to conclude, the convergence of far-right securitization, data-driven technologies, and those surveillance production demands a more systematic reflection on intelligence regulation. Surveillance infrastructures, they are reshaping the conditions in which power is exercised, often in ways that challenge existing democratic safeguards. In this context, fragile regulatory frameworks enable the expansion of discretionary and opaque forms of surveillance and monitoring. Addressing these challenges require moving towards the development of comprehensive governance frameworks. In the case of OSINT, as foresaw by the Berkeley Protocol, this implies the establishing of clear guidelines for data collection, processing, storage, and uses. Such a framework should delineate institutional responsibilities, oversight mechanisms, and accountability structures. The regulation of the system should draw on also, as Derek Murray points out, a professor from Essex, on established principles from international humanitarian law. Beyond the principles of necessity, proportionality, and discrimination that we already know, transparency and explainability are essential for ensuring that digital intelligence operations can be scrutinized and contested. It's also crucial to address the governance of procurement processes. The acquisition of intelligence systems should be subject to rigorous standards of public accountability and democratic oversight. This includes clear criteria for procurement, disclosure of contracts, capabilities, and mechanisms for independent review. In my personal, not opinion, by my research, I've been studying surveillance cameras and systems that operate in subnational levels. There's no accountability about the acquisition of materials. So such measures are especially important given the transnational nature of surveillance markets, in which technologies developed by private companies in one jurisdiction are deployed by state actors in another. This dynamic facilitates the circulation of tools that may be used in ways to undermine democratic institutions and fundamental rights. Ultimately, confronting the challenges posed by contemporary surveillance requires a dual movement. On one hand, a critical understanding of the technological and political dynamics at play, and another, to the construction of a robust regulatory and institutional mechanisms capable of governing these dynamics in a truly democratic manner. I'm not sure if I passed my time. I'm not sure about time at all, but I would like to thank you for being here first and for listening to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Alcides, Thorsten, Ana Cruz, and Professor Albers as well, if you still can hear us. Unfortunately, we are very ahead of our time. So we are not going to have more time to pose any questions to the panelists, but I guarantee they're going to be in a coffee break and you can harass them and ask any questions, many questions that they're going to be there. Okay, thank you so much. And we are looking forward to our second panel as well. Okay, thank you.